The tide was out. I went for a morning walk across a beach in Donegal during the warm weather in August. The tide was out and the sea was so far away that I couldn't hear the waves. Just an ocean hum lulling the gulls who pottered around on the dunes or idled their time on rocks and watched me with an indifferent eye. There were jellyfish scattered across the sand, and I wondered if they were dead or just sleeping. But there were no surfboards, towels, umbrellas, or other signs of human life, only that strange distant hum of the sea to companion me like the presence of a being beneath the surface of everything else. And then the phone in my pocket rang. "Your insurance was up last month," the woman said. "We wrote to you a few weeks ago to check if you wanted us to renew it." "I'm on holidays," I said, and it slipped my mind. She said, "There's no bother. You can pay now if you like. Do you have your credit card?" I did. And there on the Zen beach, I uttered numbers into her ear as she sat far away in her office and typed on her keyboard. I could imagine the money draining out of my account into the ether and then materializing on her screen moments later. We both agreed that modern technology was a wonder. It can even allow the most clinical of exchanges to become intimate. I would have talked more to her if there was time, but she was busy. So I finished my walk with my trousers rolled up to the knees and my bare feet splashing in the little waves. Later that day, I was in Dunlow looking for the post office when I noticed a cluster of people with guitars singing outside the Bridge Inn bar. The centre of attention was a man with a trim grey beard and sunglasses. He was straddling a motorcycle and accepting the adulation of the crowd. I couldn't resist approaching him. His name was Bunny O'Riordan, and he was cycling all around Ireland during August to raise money for the Middleton Hub. "What's the Middleton Hub?" I wondered. "Google it," he said, jokingly. "The website is online." And then in a quiet voice he explained that the motorbike had been a gift for his son's 18th birthday, but tragically he had lost his son to suicide. And afterwards, a few of his friends and some people in Middleton got together and created the Middleton Hub, a safe place for people with mental health issues, and especially people dealing with suicide, to connect, gather, and comfort each other. The crowd were having great fun, singing ballads and drinking beer in the afternoon sunshine, and I wished I could join them, but I had commitments elsewhere. I was heading for a barbecue that evening with a family from Dublin and some Americans who were on holidays. So the prospect of more white wine in the open air, and more pasta beneath a cloud of Donegal midges lay ahead of me. And I didn't entirely relish it, as it's a well-known fact that the most fearsome midges on earth abide in Donegal and have a fondness for the blood of Cavan men. We sat around chewing steaks and clinking glasses and watching ice cream melt and moralizing about American politics and the war in Ukraine. The midges let everyone else off the hook except me. I scratched my ankles so furiously that the others pitied me, and not even the chilled wine, which usually reminds me of the long ago Packy Bonner summer, could compensate for the agony. Eventually, the company agreed to retire indoors. But I said I was anxious to get back to the beach. The ocean is at its most serene when the sun dips like a lantern beyond the silver horizon, and it wasn't far away. Once again the tide was low as I arrived at the sand dunes. No midges could survive the wind. The light was slanting on the beautifully empty strand. My shadow stretched beside me, and I felt a kind of gladness to be there as the tide came in. But the wounded world never goes away either, and the ocean did not let me off the hook as lightly as my chattering friends at the dinner table. I suppose beauty creates its own moral imperatives. So I took out my phone and Googled the Middleton Hub, and I pressed the button, donate. And you might think that that is a plug for the Middleton Hub, and it is. You might think it is a virtue signalling on my part, like, what a good person I am that I donated. But I don't think that pressing a wee button donate for, a very small amount of money is anything of significance. I think that when you give money, or when you give something like that to an organisation or to even to somebody on the street, when you meet somebody and you give them €2, you're not doing it for their benefit. This would be a really particularly Buddhist idea. You're not doing it for their benefit. You're doing it because, in a sense, they're giving you something. They're giving you the opportunity to practice generosity. And if you practice generosity, you will become a happier person. So this is like practical. If I practice generosity, I become happier. And, well, I suppose because it's giving. So it's a way of relating to other people. It's a way of also connecting with other people where you're not putting yourself first. And that's the secret of happiness. So you give, you feel better. And therefore, when you meet somebody on the street who's sitting there with a plastic cup stretched out towards you, you don't have to decide, well, is this person worth €2? You don't have to decide, well, are they going to, add up a couple of euros and get a hostel tonight, or are they just going to drink it? You don't have to ask yourself those questions, because that's nothing to do with you. That's like their world. But your world is, how do I be generous? How do I practice generosity? Think about it like exercise. I mean, I want to exercise me legs, and I want to exercise me upper body. And I'm in poor condition because of various health issues, as you know. So the legs aren't so good, but the upper body isn't so good either. I sit too long at the computer, and I sit too long at the dinner table. And I could do more, like lifting weights or something would help me. I have two small weights now. They're about £5 or 5 kilo each, and bought them years ago, and they're sitting behind a sofa in one of the other rooms. But if I could use them a little bit more, then the practice would improve my muscles, and then I'd be healthier. And it's the same with the 6 perfections, as they call them in Buddhism. One of the great perfections is generosity. So if you practice generosity, it will improve you, like in the sense that it makes you happier. You're less caught in your own self the moment that you're giving something to somebody else, when you actually have to put the money in the little paper cup, or if you press the donate button and you give the €5. It's like, for that moment, you're letting go of something of yourself. It may be €5, but that €5 is a symbol of the way that you're releasing something of yourself. You're giving from yourself. And that is like practicing where the muscle improves, where the sense of generosity improves. Because the interesting thing is, the more generous, the more times you become generous, the more generous you become. It's a huge threshold sometimes. You'd be looking at things on the internet, advertisements for Concern and Trócaire and Oxfam and the Middleton Hub or Rape Crisis Centre or Focus Ireland, and they're all, or Bernardo's, and they're all there looking for, a fiver. And you just sometimes, and I'm talking about myself now over many years, you'd be just looking at the screen like a zombie. You wouldn't be even, you'd be feeling, okay, they're terrible things now, I have to, but you wouldn't actually press the button. And when you do press the button, when you do actually subscribe to a charity, it actually makes you feel good. And I would probably, I suppose, I'd donate to particular charities that I like or that I connect with. And I definitely get a good feeling when I give them €5. So that's all I'm saying about that. But I was talking about being on the beach in Donegal and the Middleton Hub. I met these people from the Middleton Hub in Dunlow in August, and the man in question, Bunny O'Riordan, he was travelling around the entire country on this motorcycle that he had once given as a gift to his son. It was going to be for his 18th birthday, and his son committed suicide. What they say now is he lost his son to suicide. And when I met him on the street and we had a chat, like he was such an impressive human being. And he was carrying such a burden of pain from the loss of his son. And yet his whole effort, his whole life had been turned around into making that something good. And having a centre, a welcome centre in Middleton for maybe other people who needed encouragement at that time of year, in winter. And that's what I'm thinking of. To be honest with you, we're moving into October. And I'm thinking of having a little celebration at Halloween. I've never done this since the child was young. When the child was young, you got out the apples and all the little games, and the other children from other houses would come and have party time. And there was one time I remember the woman next door, and she wasn't a young woman, she was an elderly woman, but she was minding her grandchildren. And she arrived at the door at about 5 o'clock on a Halloween evening and said, will I take your daughter? We're all going off to collect money and have a party and this, that and the other. And we saw the child get into the car and go off into the dark of a Halloween night. And she wasn't back for about 6 hours. It was about 2 in the morning when they came back. That was the kind of thing used to happen in the country, I think, where there was a lot of trust with neighbours. And you felt it wasn't entirely an extended family now, but you did have a sense that in a rural area you knew your neighbours and you trusted them with your child. And they had great fun, great Halloween. Well, I didn't have parties since those times at Halloween. Halloween was always seen as a thing for children. And this year, to be honest, I was thinking actually of having a little party myself. I was thinking maybe I'll invite somebody, 2 or 3 people or 4 or 5 people maybe, and have a little dinner party at Halloween. And I'll tell you why. Halloween is first of all, it's the great Celtic feast of Samhain. So we go into the month of Samhain. It's the month of the dead. It's the month of remembering, your ancestors and your parents and your loved ones. And like Bunny or Reardon, maybe somebody lost to suicide. Remembering the dead and having some sort of a ritual or prayer or mass or meditation that makes you feel that you're kind of commending them to God and that they are held in the loving hand of God in some way that we don't understand. So that's what we do in November. And we go to the grave sometimes of an ancestor or a parent, and there's a strange connection that happens in those moments when we think about those who have, gone before us, marked with the sign of faith. There's a kind of a funny way that it's comforting. And it's almost the same as prayer to any saint, When I think of, certain members of my family who have passed away, I remember them with love, but I also remember them in a way of feeling their presence now. Almost as if I could speak to them now. Almost as if they were still loving me. And I feel it very much. I'm in a house here where I'm working in Donegal, where I do my writing now in this little house, and it's an old house. And I always feel that the spirits of this house are always helping me and guiding me, minding me. And that's a lovely feeling. So it really is a lovely sense to have in your life that, life doesn't end at death. That in some way there is a kind of a timelessness, that being is something that transcends time, penetrates time, but that just being is eternal. And when you get kind of enveloped in being, then you never die. It's just that they're gone in a way that we can no longer understand from our ontological reality, from our history, from our sense of space. They are gone. But they're with us in some deeper way, in the way of love, in the way of being present to each other. And that's how I think of the dead, and I love, you see, if you think about November as a beautiful remembrance time of those you have loved, and a sense of how they are still with you, they're held in the gentle folds of Mary's compassion, or God. Or if you're Buddhist and thinking in terms of reincarnation, that in some sense you believe that they have gone on in their journey to be further enlightened. So when you think like that, November becomes a very beautiful time. And the only issue I have is that people do get a little bit more depressed in the winter than in the summer. Now, I don't have the statistics, but that's my experience. That when people come into this winter month of October, you hear people saying things like, God, I dread the winter. And they dread it because sometimes it's just the darkness and the loneliness, particularly people on their own, and they're longer there in the house in the evening. You're kind of doing your tea at 6 o'clock and it's dark. And you're watching the news and the television, and then suddenly there's like 3 or 4 long hours of darkness ahead of you before you go to bed, and you don't want to go to bed too early because you won't sleep, or because you'll wake in the night. And they can be long, lonely hours for people on their own. And they can be really difficult times as well in winter for people who have depression or who are vulnerable to suicide. Because the darkness pulls you down emotionally. You're not taking enough vitamin D. And I think that what I'm going to do this year is have a little party. I said 2 or 3, and then I said 3 or 4. I doubt if I'll have 3 or 4 or 5. It might only be me and the beloved, and it might only be me, the beloved, and maybe 2 others or 3 others, whatever. But I think what I'm going to do is mark the occasion. I'm not going to kind of stand outside Halloween and say, oh, that's for children. And it's easy to do that because the way that Halloween is now, it's very American. It's very kind of, amber, black and amber, those 2 colours, and these ghoulish images in the shops. But it's very kind of secular and literal. However, behind it is a very, very beautiful idea of remembering the dead and praying for the dead, those who have passed away. So I'm just going to have a little moment of joy, a little party. Now, I don't know how I'll do that. I might have a meal, I might have a bottle of wine, but I'm going to mark it in my own head, in my own private mind, that this is the turning point into the winter. So one turning point happened about 10 days ago when we had the equinox, when for the first time this year there is more darkness in every day than there is light. And that will extend right down to midwinter. So we're dealing with majority of every 24 hours is now no light. But on the Samhain, on Halloween, on the eve of All Souls and All Saints, we're moving into this really deep time of reflection about the nature of eternal life and the way that we think about our ancestors, the people who have gone before us, and ask their blessing and send a blessing to them and all that kind of crack. And they can be beautiful rituals. And someday, not someday, Halloween will be the day that I will mark that. I will open a bottle of wine. I will raise one glass in memory of my loved ones. And I will tell myself, I am now beginning this month of remembrance. And I have a notion that praying for the dead in November and remembering your loved ones in November, I have a notion that it had a function, a practical function, that it actually could be an antidote to depression, right? Because in the same way that generosity is an antidote to loneliness, it's a kind of it's a medicine that operates against loneliness. And if you donate to a charity that you like, it can make you feel that you have given something of yourself to another person. And that always reduces loneliness. And it can make you feel connected. Like imagine I give a few pounds to Focus Point or whoever. I then feel I have an interest in that organisation. I feel a little bit connected with it. I feel in a tiny way I can use the word us or we when I'm referring to that organisation. And that happens to me also with religious organisations. I mean, I think that some people, when they contribute the €5 for a mass or just to support a particular religious institution, whether it be Christian or Islamic or Buddhist. I mean, certainly Champaling in Cavan, the Tibetan Buddhist Centre, would be a place that I might in the past have given a few £5 notes or €5. But religious organisations like that too, there genuinely is a sense, it's not hocus pocus or magic, it's a psychological thing that if I give an offering of €5 to somebody in a monastery, whether it be Christian or Buddhist or Islamic, I feel that in some sense I've made a prayer. I feel that in some sense I'm supporting what those monks do, and those monks are actually in prayer. So it has a beneficial effect on my life if I give in that sense. The same as when I give the direct €2 into that polystyrene little cup that some poor person on the street, somebody homeless, is holding out to me. And it's not that I'm benefiting them or judging them or evaluating them. It's simply that they're helping me. They're there like a manifestation of the Bodhisattva to help me. And they're saying, look, be generous now. Here's a moment of opportunity. Give me €2. That's exactly what Jesus says, as long as you give to the least of these, you're giving to me. So if you're Christian, it's like imagining that this person is the Christ. This person is the one coming from God, standing before you and inviting you to be generous. And the same true for organisations like Bunny O'Riordan's little organisation in Middleton, the Middleton Hub, and the same true for religious organisations, and the same true for all those powerful organisations like Bernardo's and the Rape Crisis Centre and etc., who are about volunteers out there, working themselves away to help other people. And by sending a €5 to them, you're aligning yourself with them. You're feeling a sense of benefit. You feel less alone. So I think that when you do those things, you feel less lonely. And that would be my experience. And when I go into November, instead of dreading November, instead of saying for the next 4 weeks, I dread the winter, right? And kind of bracing myself and clenching my fists and thinking, oh God, I don't want to be lonely. Instead of doing that, I'm going to celebrate it. I'm going to take a moment at Halloween and I'm going to raise a glass and say, I am now entering this time of joyful remembrance. And I'll be remembering very particular people that are in my book. My new book is called All the Things Left Unsaid, and it's about people who passed away suddenly or unexpectedly, or close people to me that I hadn't an opportunity to say some of the things that I would have loved to say to them. And those people I'll be thinking about very specially this November, because I'll be out there doing various interviews on the television or the radio about the book and talking about them, and I just still can't get over the way that when somebody dies suddenly, it's like I can't get over the way that they're not here. I can't get over the way that, if I'm walking out now this morning, I'm going to go for a walk here in Donegal, and I think of some dear friend like Tom Hickey, let's say, the great actor, and I've often walked with him. I've often walked the beach, or I've often walked the hills in Leitrim or the streets in Dublin or New York with Tom Hickey in long ago times. Tom will never walk again those beaches or those streets. The finality of death is astonishing. And yet there's something about somebody's being, somebody's presence, somebody's individuality that I can't get away from the sense that they have been, if you like, absorbed into God, absorbed into the love of eternal being. That in some sense they were always manifesting being, that they were an emanation of God's presence or the Buddha's presence when they were on earth. And that brings me to that sense of how maybe a lifetime of 70 years is so unique, so amazingly unique and short and brief, and yet in some way that it's like the light of a flame. It's like something that comes from somewhere and is going somewhere. Rumi says it beautifully when he talks about the face you have before you were born. That there's some part of me as a human being that existed, was held, if you like, in the arms of God before I entered time. And then I enter time. I have this karmic moment, if you like, in Buddhist terms, where I am born in this lifetime. And I will complete this lifetime. And there's nothing more certain than the fact that I will die. Even though I don't know when. It could be in 10 years, it could be in 10 weeks. Could be in 10 minutes. I do not know. And yet it's certain. And what's certain also is that everything I do has a reaction, has a consequence. Your deeds follow you like a shadow, they say. So in this sense, it's like the life is so short, the life is so precious that I might do good and practice generosity to become more awake, to become more absorbed by God. And then there is the passing of somebody, and you see that, and you feel that you were in touch with something that manifested for the 70 years of their lifetime, but that had a life before and after. Because eternity can't be measured in a linear way. It's not a line. So before birth and after death are almost in the one space. And then the person is born, and the person lives, and the person dies. But there's something about them. There's something about each one of us that is living forever at another level or another dimension. And if that, let's talk just briefly about if that is true or not, from a Buddhist point of view. The Buddhist point of view would say, if you believe that as absolutely true, just what I've said, if you grasp it as the truth, you're making a mistake. If you don't believe it and if you reject what I'm saying, you're making a mistake. Because we're always moving between belief. Belief is a kind of a space between affirming something definitely and denying it. The best way to put it is, maybe it's true because when I believe it, I become a better person in the here and now. You know, the dynamic of every idea in religion is always founded on whether or not it's doing you good in the present moment and connecting you with other people. And I think that when you pray for the dead, for those who have departed, when you feel the sense that you are reaching out and sending blessings to them, when you feel that you are blessed and you are loved still eternally by your parents, by your ancestors, by your relations, by the people that you miss, when you feel the kind of communion of love, I suppose, to call it a communion of saints in the Catholic Church, but the communion of love that exists between us who are blinking our eyes and still awake and still living and breathing, between us and those who've vanished in one sense, you know. They have vanished. They have gone back into molecules, into the earth, into the cosmic life. And yet there is something about them that still belongs to us, that we still feel we want to reach out to, and they reach out to us. And that whole sense of a communion of love, when you acknowledge that, you feel better. You feel like less lonely. It can be sad to look at a photograph of somebody, maybe that you spent half your life with. But at the same time, it can be very enriching. It can make you feel less lonely in the present moment. To feel that we are not alone in death. We are not isolated. That there's some level at which we are all one. We are all like completely one, like completely absorbed in God, like some point beyond our individuality. It makes me personally even more comfortable with letting go of individuality. I can feel my individuality as a small thing. I can begin to feel my ego as like, it's just an I, like it's just me talking about me. And in every other room, in every other house, in the whole universe, and the whole world, there's another I talking about themselves. We're all just little me's. But there's also a part of us that transcends that. And when I pray for the dead, when I remember the dead, when I feel that I belong to a communion of love that envelops all the ancestors, that's the moment where I feel my ego dissolving. I feel I'm not alone. There's a lovely thing I heard Robert Thurman say on a podcast. He's the great Buddhist professor and philosopher. He was saying that the evolution of the thumb is a lovely and beautiful idea because the thumb didn't come from the grasping. The thumb is there like forgiving, for gently handling things. And there's something very beautiful about the way that the human hand evolved, almost as a symbol of compassion. So what was evolving, if you like, in the whole history of evolution? What was evolving that was so compassionate? It just makes you feel that you belong to something bigger. When I think of evolution, I think of the way that we have evolved compassion. We have evolved a really deep way to love each other. So deep that we can even embrace the idea that those who have passed away, those who have dissolved in the fires of a crematorium or in the earth, in Mother Earth, they're gone. They're gone completely. And yet there's some root to their being still feels present and still feels like a blessing. And there's a lovely Buddhist prayer I use a lot. It's Tara practice. And in Tara practice, you sit and you meditate, but before you begin to visualize the Tara Buddha, you imagine all your family around you. You imagine your parents, your close relatives, friends, strangers, people you don't get on with, so that the whole of the earth is full of beings in human form. Because human form is the only realm in which awareness of suffering can lead to the motivation to be free from suffering. And that visualization that you do in Tibetan Buddhism, you're visualizing your whole family. Not just the living, but your parents, aunts and uncles who've passed away. And it's a very, very beautiful thing to do. And I think it's a very beautiful thing to do. Many people do it in Christian prayer as well. When you go to a service and you go to a prayer meeting or you go to the Mass, that you visualize other people around you. The people that you loved and still love. And in the Buddhist practice, of course, you'll hear what I said, that you visualize friends, strangers, and people you don't get on with. There's a little phrase in there that says, not just the people that you love, but it's a very, very powerful practice when you pray, to pray with the people that you don't get on with. To pray with them, to visualize, to visualize. So you're sitting, kneeling in a church, or you're sitting, kneeling on a prayer mat, or whatever way you do it in your home. And you're visualizing maybe a mentor deity in front of you, maybe, Buddha or whatever. And you just call to mind people in your family that you love and loved, and maybe people that have passed away or been lost to suicide or been lost to cancer or some other illness, whatever. But you also visualize the individual particular people that you cannot stand, that really annoy you, that maybe that you hate, that you really have terrible difficulty with. You visualize them as praying with you. It's not that you're praying for them. It's not like, because that can be condescending, You having the direct ear of God saying, please help Auntie Molly, she's an awful old bitch. No, this is where you visualize Auntie Molly sitting beside you as your equal, and together you visualize that you're both praying to God, Buddha, whatever. So that can be a really powerful thing, the remembrance of the dead and the sense of feeling a communion of love, a sense of belonging with all those in your family who've gone before you, and also through the acts of generosity, feeling a wonderful sense of your own ego dissolving, because every time you give €5 to a respectable charity, you are dissolving the ego. You are becoming part of the work that organization does. And you belong with them. That's a lovely feeling, to belong with good people who are helping others out there. And to mark those two things, I'm going to have a little party. It might only be 4, it might be 2, it might be... At least it will be me internally, raising a glass at Halloween and saying, I acknowledge this festival. I acknowledge this moment of remembrance. I acknowledge that I, in my short life, with the certainty of my death, I still belong deeply to a wider community. And when I do that, I think that I will feel less vulnerable to depression, less vulnerable to the darkness and the loneliness of winter getting on top of me. So, I hope you have a really good winter. I hope it's special. I hope you look forward to it. And I'm saying these things because there's financial problems coming to people. There's huge difficulties coming at a surface level. And maybe all the more so then we need to gather ourselves into a state of prayerfulness and a confidence that we're not alone in this journey. So have a really good winter, have a good October, and have a good weekend. And I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.